Well, greetings. Thanks for joining me again. You know, I am recording this before Palm Sunday, and have been sharing it this week as we approach Palm Sunday. Thought it'd be a good idea to share it with you too. So I'm going to take a break for a couple of weeks from the Genesis series that I've been doing. Today, I'd like to talk about Palm Sunday and just focus it a little bit, because sometimes we know about it, but we don't really know it very deeply. We don't understand the significance and the symbolism and all that. So I want to start with a phrase that Jesus uses as he comes down from the Mount of Olives and across the Kidron River into the city of Jerusalem. And he says, because you did not recognize the time, that word could be day, of God's coming to you. That's in Luke 19, and we'll come back to that passage in a little bit, but I want to just take a few moments and do an overview of the symbolism and the deep meaning of the event that took place, which we celebrate as in what we call Palm Sunday. And so I want to start by going back to the original Passover and get a backdrop here. So in Exodus 12, we have this instruction from God. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, "This month is to be for you the first month of your year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. If any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share one with their nearest neighbor, having taken into account the number of people there are. You are to determine the amount of lamb needed in accordance with what each person will eat. The animal you choose must be 1-year-old males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight." So, everybody would select a lamb on the 10th day, and then they would bring it home, and they would have it in the house and around the place, and the kids would fall in love with it. You know, little lambs are just really easy to love. They're cute and cuddly, and it's just awesome. And so naturally everybody would fall in love with it. But on the 14th day of the month, they had to take it and have it slaughtered as their family Passover lamb. Now, this was done initially in a moment getting ready to be redeemed out of Egypt, but it later became codified into a feast day, and the ritual expanded with lots of detail. Here's a graph of the Hebrew calendar, and I want you to notice that the Hebrew calendar starts with the month of Nisan in the spring. And then we have 3 spring months and 3 summer months and 3 autumn months and 3 winter months. Now theirs is a lunar calendar rather than a sun, but it does track with the summer solstice and the autumn equinox and the winter solstice and the vernal equinox. And so it's like our calendar in many ways, even though there are some differences. Our day begins at midnight. Theirs began at sundown, both ended and began at sundown, which kind of an interesting concept. There's a principle in the Bible that shed blood is key to deliverance, to redemption. So the shed blood of the Passover lamb was to be sprinkled on the doorposts of each home. And they would do that in a way that represented the E of their alphabet, which would start the name of God, Elohim, El Shaddai, or simply abbreviated El. And so it resembles that E in God's name. The door, once it has blood applied to it, becomes a portal through which to pass from bondage to freedom, from death to life, from darkness to light, from hopelessness to hope. You see, there is a moral component to change. Now, we often want to change with a New Year's resolution or flipping the calendar or an election that brings in a new government. But it doesn't bring about moral change. So there's a component to real change that is always moral. And so the Bible has a principle, for without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sins. And the reason that we have so much trouble is sin. We've messed ourselves up in our creation, and the redemption for us and it is the shedding of blood. So Palm Sunday was the day that Israel was to select a lamb. And so the first Palm Sunday that we have recorded in the New Testament was actually the 10th day of Nisan. Was called Aviv for a while, but in modern Jewish calendars, it's the month of Nisan. Zechariah the prophet said, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly, and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt, a foal of an ass." And that's from Zechariah 9:9. So Israel, they didn't realize it, but they were actually selecting their national lamb. So Luke records something for us. Jesus, coming down on the donkey into the city of Jerusalem, says, "When he came near to the place where the road goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." Now, goes on to say, there's a comment that Luke puts in here. It says, "Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, 'Teacher, rebuke your disciples.'" You see, the Pharisees felt that the overzealous crowd was blaspheming. They were proclaiming Jesus as Messiah the King. If you have any doubt what's going on and about biblical fulfillment, the Pharisees and the Sadducees will make it clear to you. Here it is. However, Jesus endorsed what is going on. "I tell you that if these should hold their peace, the stones would immediately cry out," he says. Now, this is the only occasion recorded that Jesus presented himself as king, and it occurred on Palm Sunday. The King of the Jews. The matter of fact, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So the story is that as Jesus approached Jerusalem and saw the city, we're told by Luke in chapter 19, he wept over it. Okay, what's going on there? He then predicted the destruction of Jerusalem. Luke goes on in chapter 19, "The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and your children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you." That actually happened in AD 70. The Romans literally sacked Jerusalem, and they didn't leave one stone on another, above the rubble anyway. And I want to go back to this word time. Because you did not recognize the day of God's coming to you. God, in the person of Jesus Christ, had come to his people, the covenant community of Israel, to redeem them, to be their Passover lamb, and they did not recognize him. Because you did not recognize the day of God's coming to you. Wow, what a statement. But let's get some background, just so that we can have a good perspective on all of this. Back in Babylon, Daniel prayed and pleaded and confessed the sins of his people. And we're told in chapter 9 of Daniel, in the first year of Darius, son of Xerxes, a Mede by descent, who was made ruler over Babylon, the Babylonian kingdom. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood from the scriptures, according to the word of the Lord given to Jeremiah the prophet, that the desolation of Jerusalem would last 70 years. Now, Daniel is in exile, and the exile is to last 70 years, we are told, to make up for the years they did not allow the land to be fallow. Every 7 years, it's called a sabbatical, they were to leave the land lie fallow. On the year of Jubilee, they were to leave it lie fallow for 2 years in a row. But they had not done that for 70 cycles. And so God is allowing the land to have the rest that they did not give it. Now, Daniel is reading the scriptures. He specifically is reading Jeremiah chapter 9. And they'll pull some verses out of that chapter. Verse 7, "Therefore this is what the Lord Almighty says, See, I will refine and test them. For what else can I do because of the sin of my people?" Or in verse 10, "I will weep and wail for the mountains and take up a lament concerning the wilderness grasslands." So, God, because Daniel had found favor in his eyes by his righteousness and his trust and his diligence, God gave Daniel a revelation. Daniel chapter 9, I want to pick up verse 25. "No one understand this from the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem." Now, this is not the walls and it's not the dwellings, it's the temple. To rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, comes. There will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. Now, there was a guy back in 1874, that did some calculations for the first time, and we've been doing them lots of times by lots of different people at different points in history. But the calculations have been made from the decree. Now, there were 3 decrees. One was to rebuild the walls, one was to rebuild the dwellings in the city, and the last one was to rebuild the temple. But from the time of the decree to rebuild the temple to the very day that Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey was 483 years. Let's see how that works. Up here we have 7 sevens, that's 7 times 7, and these are years, and 62 times 7. So 7 times 7 is 49, and 62 times 7 plus the 49 is 483 years. Well, now wait a minute. So we calculate, and we're careful. The Hebrew and Babylonian years had 360 days, not 365 like ours. And then our calendar, the Julian calendar, became the Gregorian calendar, which we're using today. And there were 10 days that were lopped off to make the adjustment for not keeping up. And then there have been some leap years since then. And if you adjust for the changes that have been made, you get, would you believe, exactly 483 years to the day that Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. Now, there's some symbolism in this whole Palm Sunday triumphal entry, however you'd like to refer to it. Palm branches were tied in bundles bound with myrtle and willow. Now, there's got to be symbolism to all of this. So the palm tree represents peace and righteousness and prosperity. Typically, it grows in the valley, but it will withstand high winds, and it is drought resistant. The myrtle, on the other hand, grows in the mountains, and the willow is a water tree. It grows in marshlands, typically wet soil. But what all of this says is it doesn't matter where you're from. In other words, from all places, God comes to redeem. Oh, the word branch in Hebrew can mean to bow or to humble oneself. And it is the word that Paul uses in what we call the kenosis passage in Philippians 2, that the Messiah humbled himself in the incarnation. Kind of interesting. So the waving of palms on their feast days was typically a celebration of victory. Victory? Oh yes. You see, Jesus' journey to the cross was a way of victory. Victory over sin and death and hell. Now, it was costly, extremely costly, but it alone would bring victory. You see, true salvation is not attained militarily, and it can't be brought about politically. True salvation is a moral problem that requires death in the sense of shed blood, because the wages of sin is death. And if we're to be redeemed from the bondage of sin, then blood is absolutely essential, the shedding of blood. But if we try to shed our own, we don't have a chance to be redeemed and restored and reconciled and all that. So on Palm Sunday, Jesus came to be Israel's Passover lamb, to shed his blood as the price for salvation from sin. Wow! But Israel did not recognize its moral lostness, and it would not accept God as Savior, nor accept his wonderful salvation. They did not recognize the day that God came to them. Wow, what a story. Hey, next week, I want to take a look at the Holy Week, we call it. There's a series of events, and I'm not going to do all of them, but I'm going to pick it up at the Last Supper and then run through the resurrection, just talking about some details and some symbolism. It's really a great story. I'm going to share this one tomorrow with a group of Spanish people in a ministerial course, and we're going to be at the day before Palm Sunday. I gotta do this. But thanks for joining me in this look at Palm Sunday. And don't forget, next week we'll take a look at Holy Week. God bless you. Great to have you along.